The morning sun barely crept through the heavy curtains of the penthouse on the 47th floor. Harrison Whitmore lay still in his custom-made hospital bed, the kind that costs more than most people make in a year. At 87 years old, this man who once controlled billions of dollars now struggled to control his own breathing. The room buzzed with quiet activity. Nurses moved around like ghosts, checking monitors and adjusting tubes. The soft beeping of machines created a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of his final days. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City went about its business, completely unaware that one of its most powerful residents was preparing to leave this world. Dr. Peterson had been clear 3 weeks ago. Maybe a month, he had said, maybe less. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. All the money in the world couldn't buy more time when your body decided it was done fighting. Harrison's nephew David paced near the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones about stock portfolios and board meetings. His sister Patricia sat in the corner scrolling through her tablet, probably looking at real estate listings. The vultures were already circling, though they tried to hide it behind concerned faces and gentle voices. The lawyer, Mr. Coleman, sat at a small table with papers spread out like a poker hand. He kept glancing at his watch, clearly eager to get this over with. After all, reading a will was just business, even when the man wasn't dead yet. But Harrison wasn't thinking about his will. His mind kept drifting to a place 45 years, in the past. To a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who used to hum while she cleaned. A woman who never looked at him like he was just another rich kid with problems money couldn't solve. Harrison. Patricia's voice cut through his memories. Coleman is here. Don't you think we should discuss the arrangements? He turned his head slowly toward his sister. Even that small movement exhausted him now. What arrangements? You know, she said, her voice taking on that careful tone people use when they're trying not to say what they really mean. Your wishes, the foundation boards you'll need to resign from, the distribution of assets. Harrison almost laughed, but it came out as more of a wheeze. Distribution of assets. Such a clean way to say they wanted to know who was getting what when he died. David ended his phone call and walked over. Uncle Harrison, I've been handling the quarterly reports for the past month. The lawyers need to know if you want to make any changes to the trust structures. The nephew had always been eager, Harrison thought. Smart with numbers, but not much else. He'd inherit a chunk of money and probably double it within 5 years. Patricia would get her share and spend it on houses she'd never live in and charities that would give her something to talk about at dinner parties. There is something, Harrison said quietly. The room fell silent except for the machines. Even the nurses seemed to pause in their work. Coleman leaned forward, pen ready. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Harrison closed his eyes and saw her face again. The way she used to smile when she brought him soup when he was sick. How she never asked questions when she found him crying after his parents' latest screaming match. The way she called him young man, even when he towered over her. I want to see Esther Johnson. The silence stretched longer this time. Harrison could practically hear the confusion in the room. I'm sorry, Patricia said finally. Who? Esther Johnson. She worked for us. Back in the 70s and early 80s. David frowned. You mean one of the housekeepers? The casual dismissal in his nephew's voice made Harrison's chest tighten with something that wasn't just the cancer. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was important. Patricia exchanged a look with David. The look that said their rich uncle was finally losing his marbles. Harrison, she said gently, that was a very long time ago. Are you sure you remember correctly? Remember correctly? He remembered everything about Esther Johnson. How she always wore a small silver cross that caught the light when she moved, the way she hummed old gospel songs while she worked, how she was the only person in that big empty house who seemed to see him as more than just another burden to manage. I remember perfectly, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Find her." Coleman cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should focus on the immediate legal matters. We can discuss other requests later." No. The word came out harder than Harrison intended. Find her first. Everything else can wait. David stepped closer to the bed. "Uncle Harrison, be reasonable. That was 45 years ago. She could be anywhere. She might not even be alive." The possibility that Esther might already be dead hit Harrison like a physical blow. He had assumed, without really thinking about it, that she would still be out there somewhere, living her life, being kind to other people the way she had been kind to him. "Find her," he repeated. "Use whatever resources you need. Hire investigators. I don't care what it costs." "But why?" Patricia asked. "What could possibly be so important? About some woman who used to work for us decades ago?" Harrison looked at his sister, really looked at her. When had she become so cold? When had they all become so cold? Maybe they always had been, and Esther was the only warm thing in that house. "That's my business," he said. "Uncle Harrison," David tried again, his voice taking on the patient tone people use with confused old people. "You're not thinking clearly. The medication, the stress. Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson." Harrison felt a familiar surge of the anger that had driven him through decades of business deals and corporate battles. The anger that made him fight when everyone else said quit. The same anger that built his empire and made his enemies fear him. "I am thinking more clearly than I have in years," he said. "And I'm telling you to find Esther Johnson. If you don't, I'll change my will and leave everything to strangers." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Patricia's face went white. David's mouth opened and closed without sound. Coleman's pen hovered over his legal pad. "You can't be serious," Patricia whispered. "Try me." Harrison had learned long ago that the threat of losing money was the fastest way to get people's attention. He didn't like using it, especially with family, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "Fine," David said finally. "We'll look for her. But Harrison, you have to understand that finding someone after 45 years isn't easy. She could have moved, gotten married, and changed her name. We might not be able to locate her. Then hire better investigators." Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Harrison, you're dying. You should be thinking about your legacy, your foundations, the company, not chasing ghosts from the past." Legacy. The word sat heavy in Harrison's chest. What was his legacy, really? A bunch of buildings with his name on them? Scholarship funds that helped kids he'd never met? Board positions he'd held but never really cared about? Or maybe his real legacy was simpler. Maybe it was the memory of a woman who showed him that. Kindness didn't cost anything but was worth everything. "My legacy is my choice," he said quietly. "Find her." Coleman finally spoke up. "Mr. Whitmore, I'll need some information to help the investigators. Her full name, any details about her family, where she lived after leaving your employment." Harrison closed his eyes again. The memories were there, waiting. Esther Marie Johnson. She had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. The oldest girl was named Crystal, I think. She lived in Harlem after she left us, at least for a while. She always talked about her church, something Baptist, but I can't remember the name. The room was quiet again as Coleman wrote everything down. "How long do I have to find her?" David asked. Harrison looked at his nephew, this young man who would inherit millions but had never learned what really mattered. "However long it takes. But David, don't take too long. I don't have forever." After they left, Harrison lay alone with his thoughts and the steady beeping of machines. Somewhere out there, if she was still alive, Esther Johnson was probably going about her day. Maybe she was making dinner for her family or reading a book or helping someone who needed it, the way she used to help him. She had no idea that a dying billionaire was thinking about her. that he needed to see her one more time, that he had carried her memory for 45 years like a light in the darkness of his privileged but empty life. The machines beeped their steady rhythm as Harrison drifted toward sleep, dreaming of a woman who had shown him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought with money. 3 days had passed since Harrison made his strange request, and David was starting to realize just how difficult it would be to find someone who had vanished 45 years ago. He sat in his office downtown, staring at a stack of papers that represented everything the private investigators had found so far, which wasn't much. The lead investigator, a woman named Rebecca Torres, had been working missing persons cases for 20 years. She'd found runaway teenagers, tracked down, deadbeat fathers, and located witnesses who didn't want to be found. But this case was different. This wasn't about someone who had disappeared recently. This was about finding a ghost from the past. The problem, Rebecca explained during their morning meeting, is that we're not just fighting time. We're fighting a complete lack of digital records from that era. No social media footprints, no online presence. Everything we need to find is buried in old paper files, if it exists at all. David rubbed his temples. His uncle was getting weaker by the day, and the family was growing more impatient. Patricia had called him twice that morning, demanding updates. The lawyers were frustrated because they couldn't move forward with the estate planning. Everyone wanted this wild goose chase to end, but Rebecca wasn't ready to give up. She had started with the basics. Employment records from the Whitmore household showed that Esther Johnson had worked there from 1975 to 1980, 5 years. The records listed her address as an apartment building in Harlem, but when they checked, that building had been torn down in the 1990s. Still, it was a starting point. Rebecca's next stop was the neighborhood where Esther used to live. Harlem had changed a lot since 1980, but some things remained the same. There were still old-timers who remembered the way things used to be, people who had lived through the tough times and the better times that followed. She found her first real lead at a small corner grocery store that had been there for 50 years. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Williams, remembered Esther well. "Oh, sure, I knew Esther," he said, leaning against the counter with a smile. "Sweet woman, always. Had those 3 kids with her. Crystal was the oldest, then there was Angela, and the boy was named Jerome. She used to buy groceries here every week." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. The oldest daughter's name matched what Harrison had remembered. "She worked for some rich family downtown," Mr. Williams continued. "But then something happened. She got fired, and she was really upset about it. I remember because she came in here crying one day, said they accused her of stealing something. But I knew Esther. That woman wouldn't take a penny that wasn't hers." The pieces were starting to come together, but Rebecca needed more. "Do you know what happened to her after that?" Mr. Williams thought for a moment. "She struggled for a while, took any job she could find. Cleaning offices at night, working in restaurants during the day. She was determined to take care of those kids no matter what. Last I heard, she'd gotten a steady job at one of the hospitals." Rebecca spent the next 2 days visiting hospitals throughout the city, checking old employment records. It was tedious work, but finally, at Mount Sinai, she found what she was looking for. Esther Johnson had worked in the housekeeping department from 1982 to 2003, 21 years of steady employment. The human resources manager, a kind woman who had been there almost as long as Esther, remembered her fondly. "Esther was one of our best. Never missed a day unless one of her children was sick. She was always helping new employees learn the ropes. When she retired, we threw her a big party." "Do you have a current address?" Rebecca asked hopefully. "I'm sorry, but I can't give out personal information. Privacy laws, you know." "But—" The woman paused, seeming to weigh her options. "I can tell you that she still lives in the neighborhood, and she volunteers at the community center on 125th Street almost every Tuesday." It was Tuesday. Rebecca drove through the busy streets of Harlem, her heart beating faster with each block. After days of dead ends and false starts, she might actually be close to finding Esther Johnson. She wondered what the woman would think when she learned that her former employer's nephew was looking for her after all these years. The community center was a modest building with bright murals painted on the outside walls. Inside, Rebecca could hear children laughing and the sound of someone playing piano. She found the main office and explained that she was looking for someone who volunteered there. Esther? The receptionist, a young woman with a warm smile, nodded immediately. She's in the back room, helping with the after-school program. But can I ask why you're looking for her? Rebecca had prepared for this question. I represent someone who used to know her. He'd like to get in touch. The receptionist looked uncertain. Well, I can ask her if she wants to talk to you. What's your name? A few minutes later, an older woman appeared in the doorway. Rebecca recognized her immediately from the old employment photo she'd found at the hospital. Esther Johnson was 73 now, her hair silver gray and her face lined with years of experience. But her eyes were still bright and kind. You're looking for me? Esther's voice was cautious but polite. Ms. Johnson, my name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a private investigator. I've been hired to find you on behalf of someone from your past. Harrison Whitmore. Esther's expression changed instantly. The kindness remained, but it was joined by something else. Surprise, maybe. Or wariness. Harrison Whitmore, she repeated slowly. I haven't heard that name in a very long time. Why would he be looking for me? Rebecca had rehearsed this conversation, but now that she was here, face to face with the woman who had been nothing but a name on paper for the past week, the words felt inadequate. He's very ill, Miss Johnson. He's dying, actually, and he's asked specifically to see you. He says it's important. Esther was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something far away. Rebecca could see her processing this information, remembering things from long ago. I worked for his family, Esther said finally. But that was many years ago. I don't understand why he would want to see me now. I don't know the details, Rebecca admitted. I was just asked to find you and deliver the message. He's very insistent that he needs to speak with you. Esther looked back toward the room where the children were playing. Rebecca could see the conflict on her face. This was clearly not something she had ever expected to deal with. That family? Esther started, then stopped herself. That was a difficult time in my life. Rebecca waited, sensing there was more to the story than she'd been told. I was accused of something I didn't do, Esther continued. Something that hurt my reputation and made it very hard to find work afterward. The Whitmores let me go without any explanation or reference. I had 3 children to feed, and suddenly I was out of a job with no way to prove I was trustworthy. Pain in her voice was still fresh, even after all these years. Rebecca began to understand why Harrison was so desperate to see this woman. There was clearly unfinished business between them. I'm sorry that happened to you, Rebecca said genuinely. I can't speak for what happened in the past, but I can tell you that Mr. Whitmore seemed very emotional when he asked us to find you. Whatever he wants to say, it seems important to him. Esther sighed deeply. Is he really dying? Yes. The doctors say he has weeks, maybe a month. Another long silence. In the background, Rebecca could hear a child asking someone to help tie their shoes, and the patient voice of a volunteer responding. This was Esther's world now, a place where she was valued and respected, where her kindness was appreciated rather than taken for granted. I have a daughter, Esther said suddenly. Crystal. She's a nurse now, works at the same hospital where I used to work. She knows about what happened with the Whitmores. She won't understand why I would even consider going to see him. You don't have to decide right now, Rebecca said gently. Here's my card. Take some time to think about it. If you decide you want to see him, call me. I can arrange everything. Esther took the business card and studied it. Where is he? He's at his penthouse in Manhattan. He's very weak, but he's lucid. He's been asking about you every day since he made the request. That seemed to surprise Esther. Every day? According to his nephew, yes. He won't discuss anything else with the lawyers or his family until he has a chance to talk to you. Esther shook her head slowly as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. All these years, and now... I know it must be confusing, Rebecca said. But whatever happened between you and his family, he clearly regrets it. He wouldn't have spent this much effort finding you if it wasn't important to him. A small child ran up to Esther and tugged on her sleeve. Miss Esther, can you help me with my math homework? Esther's face immediately softened as she looked down at the child. Of course, sweetheart, give me just 1 minute, she turned back to Rebecca. I need to think about this, and I need to talk to my daughter. This isn't just about me anymore. I have a family that depends on me, and I won't do anything that might hurt them. Rebecca nodded. I understand. But Ms. Johnson, whatever happened in the past, this might be your chance to get some answers. And maybe some closure. After Rebecca left, Esther stood in the doorway of the community center, watching the investigator drive away. The business card felt heavy. In her hand, weighted with memories she had spent decades trying to forget. That night, she sat at her small kitchen table, the card in front of her, and tried to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to throw it away and pretend this had never happened. She had built a good life for herself and her children without the Whitmores. She didn't owe them anything. But another part of her, the part that had never quite let go, of the hurt and confusion from all those years ago, was curious. What could Harrison possibly want to say to her after 45 years? What could be so important that he would spend his final days trying to find her? She picked up the phone to call Crystal, then put it down again. This was her decision to make, and deep in her heart, she already knew what that decision would be. 2 days after Rebecca's visit, Esther sat across from her daughter Crystal at the small kitchen table where they had shared countless meals over the years. Crystal was 48 now, a successful nurse with her own family, but she still came to her mother's apartment every Thursday for dinner. It was a tradition they both treasured. You want to do what? Crystal set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. I want to see him, Esther repeated quietly. Just once. To hear what he has to say. Crystal shook her head firmly. Mom, no, absolutely not. Do you remember what that family put you through? How hard it was for us after you lost that job? Esther remembered everything. The long nights working 2 jobs, sometimes 3. The way Crystal had to help take care of her younger siblings because Esther was always working. The shame of being accused of theft, even though everyone who knew her well understood it couldn't be true. The months of struggle before she finally found steady work again. I remember, she said. But sweetheart, I also remember that Harrison was just a young man then, maybe 25 or 26. He wasn't the one who made the decisions in that house. He didn't stand up for you either, Crystal pointed out. If he really cared about you, he would have fought for you. He would have made sure you got a fair hearing. That was the part that had hurt the most, Esther had to admit. She had thought Harrison was different from the rest of his family. During those 5 years, she had watched him grow from a troubled teenager into a young man. She had been there, during his parents' divorce, listening when he needed to talk, making sure he ate when he was too upset to take care of himself. She had thought they had a connection that went beyond employer and employee. Not friendship exactly, but something closer to family. That's why his silence when she was accused had cut so deep. Maybe he was scared, Esther said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Maybe he didn't know how to help. Crystal reached across the table and took her mother's hand. Mom, you have a beautiful life now. You volunteer at the center, you have your grandchildren, you have respect in this community. Why would you want to dig up old pain? It was a good question, and Esther wasn't entirely sure of the answer. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the chance to finally understand what had really happened all those years ago. Or maybe it was something simpler than that. Maybe it was because, despite everything, she had never stopped caring about that lost young man who used to sit in the kitchen while she cooked, telling her about his dreams and fears. "Because he's dying," she said finally, "and people deserve a chance to make peace before they go." Crystal sighed. "If you're determined to do this, I'm coming with you." "Honey, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I won't let you walk into that house alone again, not after what happened last time." The next morning, Esther called Rebecca Torres. Her voice was steady when she said she would see Harrison, but her hands were shaking as she hung up the phone. Rebecca picked them up in a sleek black car that felt too expensive and too quiet. As they drove through the city toward Manhattan, Esther watched the neighborhoods change from modest to wealthy, from familiar to foreign. She hadn't been in this part of the city since 1980, and everything looked different now. Taller buildings, newer shops, more traffic. "Are you okay, Mom?" Crystal asked, noticing her mother's tight grip on her purse. "I'm fine," Esther lied. She wasn't fine. Her heart was beating too fast and her mouth was dry. Part of her wanted to ask Rebecca to turn the car around and take them home. The penthouse building was exactly what she expected. All glass and marble, with doormen in perfect uniforms, and an elevator that moved so smoothly she could barely feel it climbing 47 floors. This was the world the Whitmores lived in, a world where everything was beautiful and expensive, and carefully controlled. Patricia met them at the elevator, and Esther recognized her immediately, despite the decades that had passed. She was older now, her hair styled perfectly, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Esther spent on groceries in 6 months, but her eyes were the same cold blue they had always been. "Ms. Johnson," Patricia said with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Harrison has been very anxious to see you." Esther nodded but didn't return the smile. She could feel Crystal tense beside her, picking up on the subtle hostility in Patricia's voice. The penthouse was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Esther tried not to let her amazement show, but she couldn't help remembering the house where she used to work. It had been big, too, but nothing like this. This was wealth on a level she could barely comprehend. "He's in the bedroom," Patricia said, leading them down a hallway lined with expensive artwork. "I should warn you, he's quite weak. The medications make him tired." David was waiting outside the bedroom door, and he looked nervous. "Are you sure about this?" he asked his aunt in a low voice. "He's been talking about nothing else for days. I'm worried about what this might do to him." "It's what he wants," Patricia replied, though she didn't sound happy about it. The bedroom was smaller than Esther expected, but it was filled with medical equipment. Monitors beeped softly, and there were tubes and wires everywhere. In the middle of it all, looking, tiny in the big hospital bed, was Harrison. Esther felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't the young man she remembered. This was an old man, his hair white and thin, his skin pale and paper-thin. But when he opened his eyes and looked at her, she saw something she recognized. The same vulnerability that had been there when he was 25 and crying about his parents' divorce. "Esther," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Harrison," she replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. For a moment, nobody moved. 45 years collapsed into nothing, and they were back in that kitchen where she used to make him sandwiches and listen to his problems. Then Crystal shifted beside her, and the spell broke. Harrison's eyes moved to Crystal. "This must be your daughter. Crystal, right? She was just a little girl when I knew you." Crystal nodded stiffly. "I remember you, too." The awkwardness in the room was thick enough to cut. Patricia and David stood near the door, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to leave. Esther could feel their eyes on her, judging her, wondering what she was really after. "Could we have some privacy?" Harrison asked, his voice gaining a little strength. David stepped forward. "Uncle Harrison, I don't think—" "Please," Harrison interrupted. "I need to talk to Esther alone." Patricia's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "We'll be right outside if you need anything." After they left, the room felt both more intimate and more tense. Crystal moved closer to her mother's side, a silent show of support. "Thank you for coming," Harrison said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Esther admitted. "I wasn't sure why you wanted to see me." Harrison tried to sit up straighter in the bed, wincing with the effort. "There are things I need to tell you. Things I should have said 45 years ago." Esther felt her heart rate increase. "Harrison, what happened back then was wrong," he finished. "Completely wrong. And I've regretted it every day since." The words hung in the air between them. Esther had imagined this conversation countless times over the years, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure what to say. "You were accused of taking money from my father's safe," Harrison continued. "Do you remember?" How could she forget? It was the worst day of her life up to that point. Being called into the study, seeing the anger in Mr. Whitmore's face, hearing the accusation, the way he had looked at her like she was dirt on his shoe. "I remember," she said quietly. "You said you didn't take it?" "Because I didn't." Harrison closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, there were tears there. "I know," he said. "I always knew." The words hit Esther like a physical blow. Crystal's hand found hers and squeezed tight. "You knew?" Esther's voice was barely a whisper. "I knew you would never steal from us. You were the most honest person I had ever met, but I was young and scared, and my father, he was so sure, so angry. I didn't know how to fight him." Esther felt 45 years of hurt and confusion rising up in her chest. "Then why didn't you say something? Why didn't you help me?" Harrison's tears were flowing freely now. "Because I was a coward. Because I was more worried about keeping peace in the family than doing what was right. Because I failed you when you needed me most." The machine monitoring his heart rate started beeping faster, and Crystal looked toward the door, worried that the family might come back in. "Mom, maybe we should go," she said softly. But Esther wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. There were still too many questions, too many things that didn't make sense. "If you knew I didn't take the money," she said, "then who did?" Harrison's face crumpled with shame. "My cousin, Tommy. He was using drugs then, cocaine mostly. He owed money to dangerous people. He took the money to pay them off, and when my father discovered it was missing—" "He blamed me," Esther finished. "He blamed you, and I let him. God forgive me. I let him destroy your reputation to protect my family's name." The full weight of the betrayal hit her then. Not just that she had been falsely accused, but that Harrison had known the truth and chosen to stay silent. That her pain and struggle had been the price of keeping the Whitmore family secrets. Crystal was on her feet now, her face flushed with anger. "You let my mother suffer for something you knew she didn't do? Do you have any idea what you put our family through?" "Crystal," Esther said quietly, but her daughter wasn't finished. "We lost our apartment because she couldn't find work. I had to drop out of school for a semester to help take care of my brother and sister. My mother worked herself to exhaustion trying to rebuild her reputation, and you knew the whole time that she was innocent?" Harrison looked at Crystal, then back at Esther, his face filled with anguish. "I know I can never make up for what I did, but I need you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about it. Not a single day." The room fell silent except for the beeping of machines and the sound of Harrison's labored breathing. Esther stared at this dying man, trying to reconcile the person she had once cared about with the coward who had let her take the blame for someone else's crime. "I need time to think," she said finally. This is a lot to take in." "Will you come back?" Harrison asked desperately. "Please, there's more I need to tell you." Esther looked at him for a long moment, seeing both the young man she had once known and the old man he had become. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know if I can." As they left the penthouse, Esther felt like she was walking through a dream. The revelation that Harrison had known the truth all along changed everything she had believed about what happened, but it also raised new questions that she wasn't sure she was ready to have answered. Crystal was quiet during the elevator ride down, but Esther could feel her daughter's anger radiating like heat. When they finally reached the street, Crystal exploded. "Mom, promise me you won't go back there. That man destroyed our lives, and now he wants forgiveness just because he's dying? It's not fair." Esther looked back up at the gleaming tower they had just left, wondering if Harrison was watching from his window. "Life isn't fair, sweetheart. But maybe forgiveness isn't about fairness. Maybe it's about something else entirely." 3 sleepless nights had passed since Esther's first visit to Harrison's penthouse. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching the sunrise paint the Harlem streets in golden light. The same streets where she had walked for decades, building a life from the pieces of what the Whitmores had left behind. Crystal had barely spoken to her since they returned home. Her daughter's anger was understandable, but it made the house feel cold and tense. Even little Jaden, Crystal's 8-year-old son, seemed to sense something was wrong when he came for his usual after-school visit. "Grandma, are you sad?" he had asked yesterday, climbing onto her lap with his backpack still on. "Just thinking, baby," she had replied, holding him close and breathing in the scent of his hair. This was her real family now. These were the people who mattered. So why couldn't she stop thinking about a dying man 47 floors above the city? The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She almost didn't answer, but something made her reach for it. "Ms. Johnson?" It was Rebecca Torres, the investigator. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "I was already awake," Esther said. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to call you. He's having a difficult day, but he's very anxious to see you again. He says there are things he didn't get to tell you yesterday." Esther closed her eyes. She had known this call would come. Deep down, she had already decided she would go back, despite Crystal's objections, despite her own reservations. There were too many unanswered questions, too many pieces of the puzzle still missing. "When?" she asked. "This afternoon, if possible. Around 2 o'clock? I'll be there." After hanging up, Esther sat quietly for a long time. She knew Crystal would be furious when she found out, but some things were more important than family approval. Some things required courage, even when you were 73 years old and tired of fighting old battles. This time, she went alone. The penthouse felt different in the afternoon light, quieter somehow, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Patricia met her at the elevator again, but there was less hostility in her manner today. More resignation, as if she had accepted that this strange reunion was going to happen whether she liked it or not. "He's been asking for you all morning," Patricia said as they walked toward the bedroom. "David tried to get him to eat something, but he refused. He says he won't do anything until he talks to you." Esther felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't mean to upset him." Patricia stopped walking and turned to look at her. For the first time, Esther saw something other than cold politeness in the woman's eyes. She saw exhaustion and grief and maybe even a little understanding. "You know I remember you," Patricia said quietly. "From when we were young. You were always kind to us, even when we didn't deserve it, especially Harrison. You were more of a mother to him during those years than our actual mother was." The admission hung between them, fragile and unexpected. "He was a good boy," Esther said, "just lost and hurting." "He still is, in a way," Patricia replied. lost and hurting and running out of time to make things right. When they reached the bedroom door, Patricia paused. "Whatever he needs to tell you, please let him finish. I think it's the only way he'll find peace." Harrison looked worse than he had 3 days ago. The machines around his bed seemed louder, more urgent. His breathing was shallow and labored, but his eyes were bright and focused when they found her face. "You came back," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I said I might," Esther replied, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I was afraid I had lost my chance, that you would decide I didn't deserve to tell you the rest." "The rest?" Harrison struggled to sit up slightly, and Esther instinctively moved to help him adjust his pillows. The gesture was automatic, born from years of caring for others. But it seemed to mean everything to him. "Thank you," he whispered. "You always took care of people. That's who you are." "Harrison, you said there were more things you needed to tell me." He nodded, gathering his strength. "About what happened after you left. About what I discovered." Esther waited, her heart beating steadily but fast. "It took me 2 months to figure out the truth about the money," Harrison began. 2 months of watching my cousin Tommy spend money he shouldn't have had. New clothes, expensive dinners, paying off debts. I started asking questions. And he admitted it eventually. When I confronted him directly, he broke down and confessed everything. He had taken the money from my father's safe to pay his drug dealers. He knew exactly when my father would discover it was missing, and he was counting on the blame falling on someone else. The words hit Esther like physical blows. Not only had she been falsely accused, but she had been deliberately set up to take the fall. "Your cousin planned for me to be blamed? He said he was sorry, but that his life was in danger if he didn't pay what he owed. He said you were strong enough to survive being fired, but he wasn't strong enough to survive what his dealers would do to him." Esther felt sick. All these years, she had believed it was just bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it had been calculated, planned. She had been sacrificed to save a drug addict's life. "What did you do when you found out?" Harrison's face crumpled with shame. "I went to my father. I told him the truth. I begged him to find you, to apologize, to give you your job back with full back pay and references." "And?" He refused. He said it would make the family look foolish, that admitting we had made a mistake would damage our reputation. He said what was done, and we needed to move forward. Esther stared at him, trying to process this information. "So you knew the truth, and your father knew the truth, but you both decided to let me continue suffering for something I didn't do?" "No," Harrison said quickly. "I mean, yes, that's what happened. But I didn't decide to let it continue. I fought with my father for weeks. We had terrible arguments. I threatened to tell you myself, to find you and explain everything. But you didn't." Harrison closed his eyes, and tears leaked out from under his lids. "My father threatened to cut me off completely if I contacted you. He said he would disown me, take away my trust fund, remove me from the company. At the time, I thought I needed those things. I thought I couldn't survive without them. So you chose money over doing the right thing." "I chose cowardice over courage," Harrison said, opening his eyes to look directly at her. "And I've regretted it every single day for 45 years. The room was quiet, except for the beeping of machines. Esther sat back in her chair, trying to absorb everything she had learned. The betrayal was so much deeper than she had imagined. Not just one moment of weakness, but months of deliberate choices to protect themselves at her expense. "There's more," Harrison said softly. Esther wasn't sure she could handle more, but she nodded for him to continue. "After my father died, I tried to find you. This was about 15 years ago. I hired investigators just like I did this time, but the trail was cold and we couldn't locate you." "Why did you want to find me then?" "Because I had finally realized something that took me too long to understand. You weren't just our maid, Esther. You were the heart of that house. You were the only person who showed me what real kindness looked like, what real strength looked like. Harrison paused, struggling for breath. When my parents were fighting, when the house felt like a war zone, you were the one who made it feel safe. You listened to me when no one else would. You fed me when I was too upset to eat. You treated me like I mattered, not because of my money or my name, but because I was a person who needed care. Esther felt tears building in her own eyes. She had cared about the young Harrison more than she probably should have. He had been like another son to her in many ways. You shaped who I became, Harrison continued. Every good thing I've done in my life, every moment of compassion or generosity can be traced back to lessons I learned from watching you. You showed me that dignity isn't about money or status. It's about how you treat others, especially those who can't do anything for you in return. Harrison, let me finish, please. I need you to understand. After I couldn't find you 15 years ago, I made a decision. If I couldn't make amends to you directly, I would try to honor your example in other ways. He gestured weakly toward a folder on the bedside table. Every scholarship I've funded, every charity I've supported, every foundation I've established, they were all inspired by you. I've spent millions of dollars trying to help people like you, working mothers, people who were treated unfairly by their employers, children who needed someone to believe in them. Esther picked up the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents about scholarship programs, homeless shelters, legal aid societies, job training programs, dozens of organizations that Harrison had either founded or supported with major donations. The Harrison Whitmore Foundation for Worker Justice, she read aloud. That was the first one. It helps domestic workers and other service employees who face discrimination or false accusations. We've helped over 3,000 people get legal representation and find new employment. Esther flipped through more pages. There were after-school programs in low-income neighborhoods, college scholarships for single mothers, job training centers in Harlem and other communities like it. All of this was because of me? All of this was because you taught me that everyone deserves dignity and respect. That kindness is the most powerful force in the world. That standing up for what's right matters more than protecting your own comfort. Esther set the folder down, overwhelmed. But you didn't stand up for what was right when it came to me. No, Harrison agreed. I didn't. And that failure has haunted me every day since. But I want you to know that your influence on my life didn't end when you left our house. It grew stronger. Every person I helped was an attempt to honor what you taught me about being human. They sat in silence for several minutes. Outside the window, the city continued its busy rhythm, unaware of the profound conversation taking place 47 floors above. I don't know what to say, Esther finally admitted. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that your life mattered, that the kindness you showed to a troubled young man changed the course of his entire existence, that even though I failed you when you needed me most, I spent the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the lessons you taught me. Harrison reached for her hand with his own thin, weak fingers. I know I can't undo the pain I caused you. I know that saying sorry isn't enough. But I needed you to hear these words from me directly. You deserved so much better than what my family gave you. You deserved justice and fairness and recognition. Instead, you got betrayal and hardship. Esther looked down at their joined hands. His skin was paper-thin and cold, but she could feel the desperation in his grip. But look what you built from those ashes, he whispered. Look at the beautiful life you created. Your children, your grandchildren, your work in the community. You turned suffering into strength. You turned betrayal into wisdom. You became everything I always knew you could be. For the first time since entering the room, Esther smiled. I did build a good life, didn't I? The best life. A life full of love and purpose and respect. Everything you always deserved. As Esther prepared to leave, Harrison called her name one more time. Will you think about forgiving me? He asked. Not because I deserve it, but because I think it might bring you peace. Esther paused at the door. I'm already thinking about it, Harrison. I've been thinking about it for 45 years. Esther walked slowly through the streets of Harlem, the folder of Harrison's charitable work tucked under her arm. The autumn air was crisp, and the familiar sounds of her neighborhood provided a comforting backdrop to her swirling thoughts. Children played in the small park on the corner, their laughter echoing off the buildings that had been her home for most of her adult life. She had asked Rebecca to drop her off 6 blocks from her apartment. She needed time to walk, to think, to process everything Harrison had told her. The revelations from their second meeting had shaken her to her core, but not in the way she had expected. For 45 years, she had carried the weight of that false accusation. Not with bitterness exactly, but with a quiet hurt that never fully healed. She had built her life despite it, raised her children despite it, found success and respect despite it. But it had always been there, like a stone in her shoe that she had learned to walk with. Now she knew the full truth. Not just that she had been innocent, which she had always known, but that Harrison had discovered the truth and fought for her, even if he hadn't fought hard enough, that his father had refused to make things right, even when presented with proof of her innocence, that a drug-addicted cousin had deliberately chosen her as his scapegoat. Most surprising of all, that her brief time in Harrison's life had inspired decades of charitable work that had helped thousands of people. She stopped at Mrs. Rodriguez's corner store, the same place where she had shopped for groceries since moving to the neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez looked up from her newspaper and smiled. "Afternoon, Esther. You look like you've got something heavy on your mind." Mrs. Rodriguez had been running this store for 30 years, and she had a gift for reading people's faces. Esther had often thought she should have been a counselor instead of a shopkeeper. "Just thinking about the past," Esther said, picking up a carton of milk she didn't really need. "The past can be a dangerous neighborhood to walk through alone," Mrs. Rodriguez said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes it's better to have someone with you." Esther nodded and paid for the milk. "You're right. I think it's time I had that conversation with my daughter." When she arrived home, Crystal was waiting in the living room, her face set in the stubborn expression she had worn since childhood when she knew she was about to have an argument. "Where were you?" Crystal asked, without preamble. "I went to see Harrison again." Crystal stood up abruptly. "Mom, we talked about this. That man hurt you. He hurt our whole family. Why are you putting yourself through this?" Esther set the folder down on the coffee table and sat heavily in her favorite chair. "Because sometimes the story we think we know isn't the whole story." "What do you mean?" "Sit down, sweetheart. There are things I need to tell you." Crystal remained standing, her arms crossed. "I don't want to hear about how sorry he is now that he's dying. Being sorry doesn't undo 45 years of consequences." "You're right," Esther said quietly. "It doesn't. But understanding the whole truth might help us both find some peace." Something in her mother's tone made Crystal finally sit down. Esther opened the folder and began to tell her daughter everything Harrison had revealed. About Tommy, the real thief, and how he had deliberately set her up. About Harrison's fight with his father and his attempts to find her years later. About the charitable foundations and scholarship programs that had grown out of his guilt and his memory of her kindness. Crystal listened in silence, her expression shifting from anger to confusion to something that might have been wonder. "All of this?" Crystal asked, flipping through the documents. "All these people he helped?" "He says it was because of me. Because of what I taught him about treating people with dignity." Crystal was quiet for a long time, studying the papers. "The scholarship program for children of domestic workers. Look, at this, Mom. They've helped over 500 kids go to college." Esther nodded. "Kids like you and your brother and sister. Kids whose mothers were working hard to give them a better life. And this legal aid fund for workers who are falsely accused of crimes or misconduct." Crystal looked up at her mother. It's like he was trying to help other people avoid what happened to you. That's exactly what he was doing. Crystal set the papers down and looked directly at her mother. Are you going to forgive him? It was the question Esther had been asking herself for days, the question that had kept her awake at night and followed her through her daily routines. I don't know, she said honestly. Part of me wants to stay angry. It feels safer somehow. If I stay angry, I don't have to deal with the complicated feelings about caring for someone who hurt me. You still care about him? Esther considered the question. I cared about the young man he was, and I suppose I care about the old man he became. But that doesn't erase what happened in between. Crystal moved to sit on the arm of her mother's chair, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. What do you think Dad would have said? Esther's husband, Robert, had died 5 years earlier, but his wisdom still guided her decisions. He had been a patient man, slow to anger but quick to forgive. He had known about her history with the Whitmores, and he had never pushed her to feel anything other than what came naturally. Your father would have said that forgiveness isn't about what the other person deserves. It's about what you need to be whole. And what do you need to be whole? Esther looked around the small apartment that had been her sanctuary for so many years. The walls were covered with photos of her children and grandchildren, certificates of appreciation from the community center, small mementos from a life well lived. This was her real wealth. Not money or property, but love and respect and the knowledge that she had made a difference in the world. I need to understand what forgiveness really means, she said. For me, not for him. That evening, Esther called her other children. Jerome was in Atlanta now, working as an engineer. Angela lived in Philadelphia with her husband and twin daughters. Both of them listened as she told them about Harrison's request and everything that had followed. So, what are you going to do, Mama? Jerome asked over the phone. I'm going to see him one more time, but first I want to visit some of the places his money has helped. The next morning, Esther took a subway to the Lower East Side, where the Harrison Whitmore Foundation for Worker Justice had its main office. She hadn't called ahead. She just wanted to see for herself what Harrison's guilt had built. The office was modest, but busy. Young lawyers worked at desks covered with case files. A receptionist answered phones in both English and Spanish. On the walls were photos of workers who had been helped by the foundation, along with thank you letters and news articles about cases they had won. Can I help you? Asked a young woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. I'm just looking around, Esther said. I wanted to learn more about what this place does. The woman, who introduced herself as Beverly, immediately launched into an enthusiastic explanation. We provide free legal services to domestic workers, restaurant employees, hotel, staff, anyone in the service industry who faces discrimination or false accusations. Last month alone, we helped 43 people get back pay they were owed and prevented 12 wrongful terminations. That's wonderful, Esther said. How long has this foundation been operating? About 12 years now. It was started by Harrison. Whitmore, the businessman. He funded it personally until his death a few years ago. Beverly paused. Actually, I heard he passed away just recently. It's sad. He was one of the good ones, you know? Really cared about working people. Esther felt a chill. He's dead? Beverly looked confused. Well, no, not yet. But I heard he's very sick. Terminal cancer. The foundation is worried about what will happen when he's gone, whether his family will continue supporting our work. Esther thanked Beverly and left quickly, her heart racing. If Harrison was getting worse, she might not have much time left to have the conversation she now realized she needed to have. She took the subway back to Harlem and went straight to the community center where she volunteered. The children were just getting out of school, and the aftercare program was starting up. She found herself watching them play, thinking about all the children who had been helped by Harrison's foundations over the years. Miss Esther called out Keisha, a 10-year-old girl whose mother worked 2 jobs to support 4 children. Are you going to help us with homework today? "In a few minutes, sweetheart," Esther said, pulling out her phone. She dialed Rebecca Torres. "I need to see Harrison again. Today, if possible." "I'm glad you called," Rebecca said. "He's been asking for you constantly, but I should warn you, he's taken a turn for the worse. The doctors don't think he has much time left." As Esther rode the elevator up to the penthouse one more time, she carried with her not just the weight of their shared history, but the knowledge of all the good that had come from their brief connection. Thousands of people had been helped, because a guilty conscience had transformed into purposeful action. She realized now that she had already forgiven him. Not because he deserved it, and not because what happened to her didn't matter, but because carrying anger was exhausting, and she had more important things to do with the time she had left. The bedroom was dimmer than before, and Harrison looked smaller, frailer. But when he saw her, his eyes still lit up with the same desperate hope. "You came back," he whispered. "I did," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "And I have something to tell you." Harrison waited, his breathing shallow but his attention focused entirely on her. "I forgive you," Esther said simply. "Not because what you did was okay, and not because it didn't hurt me and my family, but because holding on to anger isn't serving anyone anymore. Because you've spent 45 years trying to make amends in the only way you knew how. And because forgiveness isn't about you, it's about me choosing to be free." Harrison closed his eyes and tears streamed down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me the one thing I needed most." "Peace," Esther said, taking his hand. "We both deserve peace." They sat together in comfortable silence as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, two old souls who had finally found their way back to understanding each other. Harrison passed away peacefully 2 days after Esther forgave him. She learned about it from Rebecca Torres, who called her early Thursday morning with the news. Patricia had asked Rebecca to inform her personally, knowing that Esther would want to know. "He went quietly in his sleep," Rebecca said. "The nurses said he seemed more at peace in those last 2 days than he had been in weeks." Esther sat by her kitchen window, the phone still in her hand, watching the morning traffic flow down the street below. She felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the loss of life, even the life of someone who had hurt her. Relief that his suffering was over, and that they had found peace between them before it was too late. "Did he say anything?" she asked. The nurse mentioned that he kept talking about someone named Esther, saying "thank you" over and over. They didn't understand what he meant, but I think we do. After hanging up, Esther made herself a cup of tea and sat quietly for a long time. 45 years of carrying a burden, and now it was finally over. Not just for Harrison, but for her, too. She realized she felt lighter somehow, as if she had been holding her breath all these years and could finally exhale. When Crystal arrived that evening for their weekly dinner, she found her mother cooking Harrison's favorite meal from the old days. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, the same comfort food Esther used to make for him when he was upset as a young man. "Mom, why are you making that?" "I don't really know," Esther admitted, stirring the gravy. "It just felt like something I needed to do. A way of saying goodbye, I suppose." They ate in comfortable silence, both women lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Crystal spoke up. "The funeral is Saturday. Rebecca called me this afternoon. The family specifically requested that you attend." Esther looked up, surprised. "They want me there. Patricia asked for you personally. She said Harrison left specific instructions that you should be invited to speak at the service if you wanted to." The idea of speaking at Harrison's funeral had never occurred to Esther. What would she say? How do you sum up a relationship that had caused so much pain, but had also led to so much good? "I don't know if I can do that," she said. "You don't have to," Crystal replied. "But if you decide you want to, I'll be there with you." The funeral was held at one of Manhattan's oldest and most prestigious churches. Esther had never seen anything like it. The sanctuary was enormous, with stained glass windows that cast colored light across the polished wooden pews. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than most people spent on their entire wedding. But despite the grandeur, there was something intimate about the service. The church was full, but the atmosphere felt more like a family gathering than a public memorial. Business leaders sat next to community activists. Wealthy socialites shared pews with people who looked like they worked for a living. Esther and Crystal sat toward the back, both wearing simple black dresses that somehow felt appropriate in this space, filled with expensive suits and designer clothing. Esther clutched a small piece of paper with notes she had scribbled down in case she found the courage to speak. The service began with Patricia welcoming everyone and sharing memories of her brother. She talked about Harrison's business success, his philanthropy, and his impact on the city. It was a nice speech, but it felt formal and distant, like she was reading from a biography rather than speaking from the heart. David spoke next, focusing on Harrison's charitable foundations and the thousands of people they had helped. He read statistics and shared success stories, but again, it felt like a business presentation rather than a personal tribute. Then Patricia stood up again. "Before we close, there is someone else who would like to speak. Someone who knew my brother in a different way, during a different time in his life. Harrison specifically requested that we invite her to share her memories if she felt moved to do so." She looked directly at Esther. "Ms. Esther Johnson." The church fell completely silent. Esther felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her heart began racing, and for a moment she considered staying in her seat. But then she thought about Harrison, lying in that hospital bed, desperate to make peace with his past. If he could find the courage to face his mistakes, she could find the courage to honor his memory. She stood up slowly and made her way to the front of the church, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. When she reached the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces and saw curiosity, confusion, and in some cases, recognition. "My name is Esther Johnson," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I worked for the Whitmore family 45 years ago." A murmur went through the congregation. Clearly, most of these people had no idea who she was or why she was speaking at Harrison's funeral. "I was their housekeeper for 5 years, from 1975 to 1980. During that time, I watched Harrison grow from a troubled teenager into a young man. I was there during his parents' divorce, during his struggles in school, during the times when he felt lost and alone in that big house." She paused, finding strength in the familiar rhythm of speaking from the heart, the same way she had spoken to countless children at the community center over the years. Harrison was not a perfect person. Neither am I. Neither is anyone in this room. But he was a person who learned from his mistakes, even when it took him far too long to learn. Esther told them about Harrison's kindness as a young man, his vulnerability, his search for meaning beyond his family's wealth. She talked about the comfort food she used to make for him and the late-night conversations when he couldn't sleep. "When I left the Whitmore household in 1980, it was under difficult circumstances. I was accused of something I didn't do, and it caused great hardship for me and my family." The murmur grew louder now. People were shifting in their seats, sensing that this story was going somewhere unexpected. "For 45 years, I carried that hurt with me. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet pain that comes from being misunderstood. I built a good life despite that pain. I raised my children, found meaningful work, and contributed to my community. But that old wound never fully healed." Esther looked directly at Patricia and David, who were both listening intently. 2 weeks ago, Harrison asked to see me. He was dying, and he had something he needed to say. What I learned in those final conversations changed everything I thought I knew about what happened all those years ago. She told them about Harrison's confession, about his discovery of the truth, about his father's refusal to make things right, and about his lifelong effort to honor her example through his charitable work. Harrison spent 45 years trying to make amends for a moment of cowardice when he was young. He couldn't undo the harm that was done to me, but he could prevent similar harm from happening to thousands of other people. Every scholarship he funded, every legal aid case he supported, every worker protection law he advocated for grew out of his memory of one woman who was treated unfairly. The church was completely silent now. Esther could see tears in the eyes of people throughout. The congregation. That's the man I want you to remember today. Not the frightened young man who failed to stand up for what was right, but the man who spent the rest of his life standing up for what was right. Not the person who made a mistake, but the person who turned that mistake into a mission. She paused, looking down at her notes, then deciding to set them aside. Harrison asked me for forgiveness in his final days, and I gave it to him, not because what happened didn't matter, but because forgiveness was the only way for both of us to find peace. He died knowing that the woman he had wronged had chosen to remember his kindness rather than his failure. Esther stepped back from the podium, then returned to it one more time. If you want to honor Harrison's memory, don't just remember his wealth or his success. Remember his transformation. Remember that it's never too late to make amends for past mistakes. Remember that one act of kindness or one act of cruelty can echo through decades and touch thousands of lives. She looked out at the congregation one final time. Harrison taught me that redemption is possible for anyone who truly seeks it. That's the legacy he leaves behind. That's the man we're here to celebrate today. As she walked back to her seat, the church erupted in applause. Not the polite, restrained applause typical of formal funerals, but genuine appreciation for words that had clearly moved everyone present. After the service, people approached Esther throughout the reception. Lawyers from the foundation thanked her for sharing Harrison's story. Business associates who had wondered about his philanthropic focus finally understood its origin. Family friends expressed their admiration for her grace and forgiveness. But the most meaningful moment came when Patricia pulled her aside privately. "Thank you," Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. "That was the most honest thing anyone said about my brother today. You helped me understand him in a way I never had before." "He was a good man who made a bad choice when he was young," Esther replied. "Most of us have been there in one way or another." "I have something for you," Patricia said, handing her an envelope. "Harrison asked me to give this to you after the funeral." Inside was a letter in Harrison's handwriting, written in the shaky script of his final days. "Dear Esther, if you are reading this, I am at peace, and I hope you are too. I have made arrangements to ensure that all of my charitable foundations will continue their work for many years to come. But there is one more thing I want to do. I am establishing a new foundation in your honor, the Esther Johnson Foundation for Dignity and Justice. It will focus specifically on protecting domestic workers and other service employees from the kind of treatment you experienced. I am asking that you serve as its first chairwoman, with complete authority to shape its mission and choose its staff. You don't have to accept, but I hope you will consider it. You have already shown thousands of people what dignity looks like through your example. Now you can help protect others from losing theirs. With gratitude and respect, Harrison." 6. Months later, Esther sat in a conference room in downtown Manhattan, surrounded by lawyers, social workers, and community advocates. The Esther Johnson Foundation for Dignity and Justice had just won its first major victory, a new state law that required employers to provide clear documentation before terminating domestic workers and established a fund to provide legal representation for those who faced false accusations. The law had been named the Whitmore-Johnson Dignity in Work Act, recognizing both Harrison's funding and Esther's inspiration. "This is just the beginning," Esther told the board members assembled around the polished conference table. "There are thousands of workers out there who need protection, who need advocates, who need someone to stand up for them when they can't stand up for themselves. After the meeting, Esther took a taxi to the cemetery where Harrison was buried. She brought fresh flowers, the same kind of simple daisies she had always preferred to expensive arrangements. Standing beside his grave, she spoke to him as if he were still listening. "We did it, Harrison. We turned something ugly into something beautiful. We turned a 45-year-old injustice into a force for justice. Your guilt became my purpose, and together we're making sure no one else has to go through what I went through." She placed the flowers on his headstone, which bore a simple inscription: Harrison Whitmore. He learned to turn mistakes into meaning as... She walked away. Esther felt the satisfaction that comes from a life fully lived and a mission clearly understood. She had forgiven, but more than that, she had transformed. The pain of the past had become the power to change the future. And somewhere, she believed, Harrison was finally at peace, knowing that his legacy was in capable hands. The Foundation's work would continue long after both of them were gone, helping workers find justice, dignity, and the kind of respect that should never have to be fought for but too often is. It was the best possible ending to a story that had begun with betrayal but had become ultimately a story of redemption and hope.